So I'll just wait for a couple of moments, let the students join in and settle. So in the meanwhile, the people who are joining in, if you're able to hear and if you can just let me know. So we are going to, I'll brief you about the Forestry Optional Crash Course, which is going to cater to the demands for the Indian Forest Mains for 2024. And I'll also, in the first lecture, also give you an orientation how we're going to go about the lecture. We'll also see some important attributes and aspects, what are the areas to focus, some attributes related to the answer writing part here. So people who are online, you can just use the chat option, just send a hi. If you're able to properly hear, we can just then begin. And I'm also looking at the comment section. So if you have any specific doubts, whenever throughout the session, you can just mention that in the comment section, okay? So that is something that we can do, and that is how we can go ahead and start the session. So here we are going to talk about overall our approach to the Forestry Optional, and we'll also see the paper for 2023, right? And we'll also see what are the major areas that in the coming 50-55 days that you have to focus on so as to ensure the maximum return that you can get, okay? So I'll start overall here, right? The people who are joining in can follow along, and again, this is going to be an interactive session. Today and tomorrow, we are going to I'll just write here and mention so that you can follow. So the 3rd and 4th, both these classes are going to be live on YouTube, right? And then from Monday, that is from the 7th, we will have a proper live and offline classes, right? So in these 2 classes, of course, in the very first class today, we will have a basic orientation. Then I'll also cover aspects related to silviculture. And in tomorrow's class, we'll go into more detail into the ecological, physiological aspects which influence the vegetation, right? So both these sessions are going to be live on YouTube, so you can make the best use of that, right? Now, before we begin, and I will go about the outline, let us start and let us also see what we have to offer here, right? This is how our syllabus is divided for the Forestry Optional, okay? You have 4 sections. So I will first talk about this and the areas that we have to focus on, and then we'll go into how to do it, and then I'll give you a lot of practical examples on how to go about it, right? Now here in the Forestry Optional, this paper 1 is of 200 marks. Similarly, paper 2 is of 200 marks. It's a combination of 400 marks, right? Now in paper 1A, we have 4 major sections. We start with Silviculture General. We have Silviculture Systems, Silviculture of Mangroves and Cold Deserts, followed by Silviculture of Indian trees, okay? And there you have a lot of species that you have to go through, right? Now this happens to be a very scoring part when we talk about paper 1, okay? So in paper 1, when we are focusing our attention on this particular section A, we have to be very thorough with Silviculture General. And in fact, when we go through our lectures in the crash course also, we'll put a lot of focus on Silviculture General. If we do this well, you also get a foundation on Silviculture Systems, you also get a foundation on other 2 areas, and you will see connections throughout, right? In all the other areas. So be it paper 1B, be it paper 2A and even 2B, the Silviculture is going to be connected, okay? So overall, you have to know that this is going to be a very interconnected optional, okay? Second, of course, this is a science-based, okay, or a technical optional, which means in all these aspects, we have to be very particular, okay? In today's also lecture, I'll tell you some important definitions, so you have to be thorough with the definitions. We have to know examples, okay, the particular applications wherever possible. So these aspects have to be taken into account, right? So again, starting from this part here, this is going to give you a major chunk. And if you attempt more questions from paper 1A, there is a higher chance of you getting more marks, simply because the nature of questions is going to be more technical here. Okay, in just 5 minutes from now, I'll also go through the paper of 2023, which also will give you some insights on how to approach and prepare in these coming days, right? And additionally, those of you who are just starting, my advice would be that sincerely at least go through the previous year question of 5 years. If you again spare more time, you should go 6, 7, 8 or even 10 years of previous year question. Okay, so syllabus and previous year question has to be abided by, and you should definitely go through it. Okay, so that is one. Now this is the first part. You have done paper 1 section A. Then when we talk about paper 1 section B, here we have aspects of afforestation, agroforestry, social forestry, joint forest management, tribology, okay, the aspects related to the tribals, the aspects related to agroforestry. Now this is one part that you also have done while preparing for the UPSC prelims or even in your GS for civil services. Okay, however, when we talk and when we do this in the Silviculture optional point of view, I'll make sure that we know enough case studies, data wherever required from India, through the reports of Niti Aayog, etc. We'll try to enrich this as well. Fine. Then you have another important component, that is forest soils conservation and watershed management. Okay, and here also you will again and again see the different types of soils, how the conservation can be done, new techniques if they are. Okay, the concept of watershed, how can watershed management be done, and particularly when you see paper 1B in the context of increasing desertification, in the context of increasing the aspects of climate change, okay, plus India's commitment to the Bonn challenge, for example, India's own commitment for 2.5 ton to 3 ton afforestation overall, which was done in the Paris Agreement, right? So Bonn challenge or the Paris Agreement, all our pledges for in that respect again make this part very important for you, right? Third aspect is also something that you've done in your GS, General Studies, environmental conservation and biodiversity. Okay, now here also whatever are the major updates that we'll do, but of course we'll not go into too much of basics here, because this is something that you've already done in your previous part, okay, which is the part of GS, right? But okay, whatever questions have been asked, I'll try to help you out, and how to cover this part, we'll also have a look at that. Then this is an important part when we talk about tree improvement and seed technology. Okay, the very basics of seed and nursery, we do it in the silviculture part. The aspects of tree improvement and seed technology is another part which is going to be very high scoring. Okay, so how can we improve the tree varieties? Okay, and here different aspects, right from breeding, right from grafting, etc., is what you read about. So here one has to have good command on the basic definitions, the types of processes used, provenance trials, for example, the different genetic trials, etc. So the tree improvement is one important part, and this is also very important. Think from a silviculturist point of view. You have a barren land, okay, now you want to have, let's say you want to have proper timber plantations. The timber plantations can be of teak, maybe sal, okay. For example, teak for us is going to be Tectona grandis, okay. Sal, for example, can be Shorea robusta, right? So now if the land is degraded or if the yield is less, and let's say if we want to have an improvement in the overall stand, this is where we have to focus on. We talk about the tree improvement and the seed technology aspect there, okay. So this also becomes an important part for a discussion. Then we move to the second part, that is paper 2. Now in paper 2 again, you have paper 2 section A, section B. In the section A, right, you start with forest managements and management systems, okay. Now in forest management and management systems, now this again, right, we'll see what are the different ways to manage the strands of forest, how to improve their productivity, overall yield, timber produce, etc. So managements and the different systems associated with this. Here we'll talk about the aspects of yield, different ways to calculate and maximize yield, again a very important aspect. Then after joining or after becoming an Indian Forest Services officer, you after a certain point of time, okay, let's say you become the DFO, you would be making the forest working plans, okay. So these are 10-year documents wherein all the aspects how to manage the forest, what is to be done in the event of calamity, etc., disasters, and even in normal day-to-day functioning, all of that is a part of forest working plan. Okay, so this also, and this is again a very short, a very high yielding area. Okay, so after I'm done with this basic syllabus outline, I'll also tell you what are the very high yielding areas where we can just put in small efforts but we'll get a lot of results there, right? Then forest mensuration and remote sensing. Now remote sensing is an important part. Those who have the option of geology, they also read remote sensing. That is going to be complementary. Similarly, those of you who have the option of agriculture engineering, you would also read remote sensing. Okay, so if you do it here, again in both these optionals, similar questions will be covered here. But the main aspect of paper 2A also would revolve around forest mensuration. Okay, so here right from height, diameter, girth, etc., the management or the measurement part. Okay, so different instruments, what are the errors that can come in the instruments, all of that part is the aspect of forest mensuration, all the aspects related to the measurement of it. And finally, there is the aspect of forest surveying and forest engineering. Here also we talk about culverts, different bridges, different structures to support the overall forest and the forest related stands, right? This is the overall, let's say, outline of paper 2A. However, your knowledge of paper 1A and 1B is going to be applied here, and similarly whatever you read here can also be mentioned. So whenever, let's say, you do answer writing, for example, let's say you start with paper 1A, but you will be able to write better answers after you are done with these sections. Okay, so again, I'm not discouraging you to write answers, but my point is, let's say you have done one topic, later on you add different layers and different ideas. So when you write an answer, finally you can use your knowledge from different sections. Okay, and this will be overall help you in writing a good multi-dimensional answer. Okay, last section, again a high yielding section, is paper 2B. Okay, now here there is forest ecology, there is ethnobotany. Okay, so when I say forest ecology, the basic interactions that we see in the forest, be in terms of amensalism, commensalism, the basic nomenclatures, terminologies, that is a part of forest ecology. Okay, in ethnobotany, we are basically talking about, for example, the tribals, the traditional forest dwellers, okay, the kind of minor forest produce, okay, and the related aspects there. So that all can be seen in the part of ethnobotany. Okay, then you have an important part of forest resources and utilization. Okay, so here in this part, one important part is going to be the non-timber forest products. And every year, in fact, we'll also see some questions. You will see direct questions that write down the 10 species of bamboo, or write down the differences between gum, resins, oleoresins, etc. Okay, or the different types of non-timber forest products, or the medicinal varieties, the scientific names there. Okay, so here you have to be specific. I know there's going to be some cramming in this part here, but if you do this, okay, and so you will also get a high yield here, right? Then there is an aspect of forest protection and wildlife biology. Okay, now some part of this we also see in the biotic factors, in the biotic interactions. Okay, however, we do this in more detail, how to protect the forest, what is the different interactions with the wildlife. Okay, now specifically in the last 1.5 years, and in fact in some last years, human animal conflict has also been one of the major, let's say, points of discussion. Now if I talk about areas, or let's say in Kerala, human elephant conflict, in parts of central India, again a lot of human conflict with leopards or even with tigers, and of late recently in UP, Uttar Pradesh, in Bahraich, there was deadly wolf attacks. Okay, so here again, maybe from current affairs something can be inspired, a question can come. Yes, we can see that. And lastly, for example, we have forest economics. Okay, so here also cost benefit and analysis, maximization or valuation of produce, how to market it better, all the aspects related to economics. Again, this is also a small section which we can cover easily. And then a section, forest legislations. Okay, Now in legislations, you already have done it in your UPSC prelims, but in forestry optional, you will see this in more detail, okay? And there have been instances in the past, even in 2021, though they've asked specific sections, okay? That let's say from section 5 to section number 2025, etc. of the Wildlife Protection Act, okay? Or some important sections of the Indian Forest Act. So this is also where we have to go slightly in more detail, okay? And this is something that we can also have a look at, okay? So this is one thing overall. So this is just an overview I wanted to share with you, right? Before we go any further, we'll also just have a look at how have the questions in UPSC been, just to get an idea, okay? So I've just opened the tab and we are seeing the paper of 2023, and again directly from the UPSC website, you can go through your respective optionals. You can see forestry at paper 1 and paper 2. So this is the paper for this is paper 1, right? So I'm just going to just give you a brief overview of what is the kind of questions and what is the demand that is expected, right? Now the very first section here also, like you would have seen in your civil services, the first section is compulsory. You have 5 8 markers, okay? 5 questions. So one question talking about the aspect aspect of natural regeneration, okay? Basically the dying back phenomena that is seen in Shorea robusta. Then quantity of seeds, again both these topics are covered in silviculture. What are mangroves? Direct question from silviculture of mangroves. What is a frost hole? So again, when we cover climatic, edaphic, topographic, biotic factors, within climatic we also see frost. How does frost affect regeneration, okay? And then the botanical names. Now here if you see, you have to be very specific, right? Write down the botanical names of 3 tree species, okay? So when we will see about natural regeneration, we'll see about artificial regeneration. In that we'll read about copicing. I'll also show you images right now. Let's say if you're very new, you may not even know what is copice, fine? So we'll see what is copicing, what is pollarding. Here you are expected to know which species are non-copicers, who do not copice, poor copicers, good and even strong copicers, right? Now, for example, next we see seed collection and seed storage. Seed collection, seed storage also is a topic that we cover in silviculture. And then we divide the seeds into orthodox seeds and recalcitrant seeds, right? Which is also something we'll cover in the coming week. And there the whole idea is that which seeds can be dried, which will have low moisture content, and which seeds will have high moisture content. Based on that, we have seed collection and seed storage methods, right? Then, for example, write down the factors which affect the natural regeneration of sal, okay? So when we do the aspects of natural regeneration, there are some specific case studies. One, for example, can be sal. One can be AB spindro. Now, AB spindro is a conifer, right? Again, in the very first or 2 lectures, I'll be using names you may not be very familiar with, but from this lecture itself, I'll make you write down certain tree species, right? So at least after 2-3 lectures, you will be very familiar that, okay, this is a term. And the more you read, let's say put emphasis on it, this will become second nature to you. But there's a slight learning curve that we'll have to follow, okay? So after I'm done with this, let's say just brief overview, again, we'll do some important parts here that will also give you some idea, right? So this is an aspect of natural regeneration. In fact, when we see the syllabus of silviculture general, the very first topic, that natural and artificial regeneration is directly mentioned there. Then what are accessory systems? 2-storied high forest systems. Now high forest, what is a high forest? What is a copice forest, etc.? We'll see that. Accessory systems is something we'll cover in silviculture systems. That would be the second topic, okay? Now, economic importance of following tree species. Now here are some species. For example, acacia species we'll see in arid conditions, okay? Casuarina species, casuarina plantations we see in coastal regions, okay? Hardwickia binata, again, which is very good for pollarding. Butea monosperma, known as palash, okay? Flame of the forest. Tamarindus indica, to tamarind, okay? Imli, for example. So again, what is the economic importance of these species, right? So point is, slowly and steadily you will get and you will understand about the tree species as we move along our lectures, right? Now, what are the, for example, sequences of operation followed in mangrove? Now, I've told you, and in fact, see, mangrove and cold desert, a very short topic, but very high yielding. In this year itself, in 2023, 3 questions, okay? 1 question you see on mangroves direct. What are mangroves? What are their ecological implications? Now, for students of forestry optional, you are expected to write a more technical definition. We'll also see in our respective portions how to do that, okay? 1 question here. Another question, for example, you see sequences of mangroves in operations in mangrove afforestation, fishbone technique in mangrove plantations. Now, when I also take the environment classes for UPSC prelims, okay, there also when we see for mangrove restoration, there also we see fishbone, okay, and different parts of India fishbone technique is being used, okay. So here this is to be done in more detail, right? Then again, in silviculture systems, we see about clear felling system, shelter wood system, etc. So here, one is expected to write about the Andaman canopy lifting shelter wood systems. What are the operations there, right? Next question, what is a cold desert distribution? Now, sometimes they will ask you, tell 4 or 5 important varieties in cold desert or of mangroves or of some other attributes. So that is also a part. So again, in the crash course, the whole idea is we will be very systematic in our approach for each of the sections. We will see the main things that we have to remember, followed by a lot of previous year questions, okay. So again, the idea is to give the highest return on time, okay, right? So we'll confine ourselves to what has generally been asked, and again, what are the expected things, for example. In fact, I'll also show you, when we do paper 1B, there is always a reference to climate change and some other aspects, okay. In 2023, they had not asked you, but in 2022, in paper 1A also, they had mentioned that, okay. Fine. Clear felling system is an aspect that we do in silviculture systems, that can be done there, right? Now, this is an aspect. Now, when we talk about, or when we understand what are plants, what are roots, etc. So here, for example, buttress roots, maybe you would have heard about, okay, when you have read about maybe mangroves. There are root suckers. Root suckers are also used for propagation, vegetative propagation. They are also used. Lignotubers. So again, when we read about different types of stems and roots and defects, these are some of the parts we'll also see, okay. So these are some of the one-liners they have asked you. Now, if we go to paper section B, right? Now here, of course, you will see more general type of questions, apart from the questions that you see, let's say, in tribology or maybe the parts of tree improvement, okay. Now, role of wind breaks and shelter belts in agroforestry. Now, somebody who has agriculture engineering as an optional, you also do this part. Somebody with agriculture also, they also do wind breaks and shelter belts, and of course here also we read about wind breaks and shelter belts, okay. Now, notice the questions are very specific. Name 2 tree species for each, right? That is something important. Then discuss the significance of exotics in tree improvement, okay. So for example, one of the prominent example here can be eucalyptus, okay. So how can we use eucalyptus, okay, and in doing so, what is the significance? So you'll see both, there are some advantages to using exotics, of course there are some also disadvantages, right? How does moisture influence the soil formation directly? There's a topic of forest soils. So in that, the growth of vegetation and moisture part, we can talk about that, right? Now, this is JFM, we know, Joint Forest Management. Think about the National Forest Policy of 1988, okay, wherein local people and the state forest departments would come together. Now here, we have to write a note on gender issues in joint forest management, okay. Now very recently, 50 years of CHIPCO movement happened, okay, which also as an environmental movement, the gender aspect was also prominent there. So perhaps we can borrow something from there and write, okay. But there will be some questions like this that you have to then also improvise exactly on the exam, because this is a compulsory part, right? Greenhouse gases result in global warming. Again, if you've read your environment part here, this is going to be easily done. But my point is, if you're able to again substantiate, use proper IPCC report, for example, give certain facts and data, show the temperature increases, and then in this part, greenhouse gases, what are the important greenhouse gases, and then you properly outline it, you will get more marks. Fine. Then, for example, the role of agroforestry in the well-being of mankind. Generally, this is not a very difficult question. Theory of humus formation, again, is something that you will cover in forest soils. Okay. What is deforestation? Impact of deforestation on environment. Okay. Now here in this question, if you can link it to FAO's report, okay, if you can link it to desertification, you can mention UNCCD also, some supporting data from India and around the world, so that can overall help. And impact of deforestation on environment and overall on different ecosystems. Fine. Problems faced by tribal communities in India, again, relatively easy question. Benefits of watershed management, easier question. Okay, so again you will see all blocks are 40 marks each. You have to attempt 5 out of 8. Okay. Now third part is slightly challenging. Let's say if somebody has not covered the aspect of tree improvement overall. Okay. So here you will see heritability and its types, narrow sense, broad sense, scope and future of hybrids in applied tree. Now this second part is an even more easier question. Okay, but of course for the first part one has to have read tree improvement, otherwise this you will not be able to do that, right? Then what are biofertilizers? Again for prelims, maybe some of you have read about one or two names of biofertilizers. Here you are expected to define it, you are expected to give some examples related to it. Okay, then in silviculture also, when I'll talk to you about edaphic means soil based factors, there we do mycorrhiza. There we do types of mycorrhiza, endomycorrhiza, ectomycorrhiza, ectomycorrhiza, and followed by biofertilizers. Okay. So this is exactly done. Sometimes they ask you what are the differences. This is again a topic which has been repeated multiple times. Okay. Significance of variation in tree improvement, direct question. Okay. Above we see a question on variability, a significance on variation. Okay. In tree improvement, and last again is something that you also do in environment, that is the environment impact assessment. In fact, this year in UPSC Mains, if you see, they had also asked you write down specific activists and the specific case studies related to EIA. Okay, what are the activities, what is the procedure involved? So this is your entire paper that is there related to paper 1. Fine. Now some takeaways that I just want to tell, and that will overall help, right? So for example, and this is again how we can structure. And I'll say previous year questions or the previous year papers, right? Right now we've only done paper 1A. In the coming days, etc., we'll also go through the paper 2A as well, because when I start with paper 2A, then giving an orientation would be more better, because right now we are starting with paper 1. So see, what is the takeaway? Here you have to be very smart. First, the syllabus, the major topics of the syllabus. Okay. Again, we are writing major, we are not writing every part here. Okay. This should be our focus. Okay. Followed by at least 5 years of previous year question. Okay, if we can do more, even better. Again, this is also for somebody who has limited time and let's say they want to prepare by themselves. That is what you have to do. But now you've noticed questions are specific in nature, exact names, significance and tree varieties, etc. Right? So here for specifics, I would encourage you keep a separate copy. Okay, you would have seen even in GS mains, people have for data, facts, committee reports, etc. copies. For forest, in your copy, all you have to have a mention of, you have to have diagrams. Otherwise, if the diagrams are even scattered, you have multiple notes here and there. If things are not at one place, it will be difficult for the last time revisions. Okay, you can have wherever possible write down keywords, and this is where you, for example, you are seeing a lecture. Whatever keywords you are seeing me utter, or wherever in the notes you are saying, in a rough copy, keep writing it down. The more you write it, the better it is. Okay. Wherever you see good examples, case studies, you can make a note of this. Okay. Because this is a part that is going to differentiate your answer, right? Because generally here also, because of some questions being general, people will try to attempt most paper. Okay, how can you create a difference is either you attempt more questions from 1A, or in paper 1B you attempt more questions from the tree improvement part. That way you can show the examiner that you know the technical details, right? Because otherwise, if the question is on, let's say, greenhouse gases, there will be a very slight difference between you and the other candidates, right? Number one. Second, focus on your presentation and answer writing. Okay. Now, of course, we know the confines of time, okay? And you have to be very mindful. Most of you who are going to may not have the luxury of having the same optional in civil services and the forest services, right? So you may have to juggle two optionals alongside English and GK, fine? So here also, if you are able to restrict yourself, right? And then you have to practice things. In one reading, etc., you will not be able to reproduce. So that means small part you have to do it again and again. And if you're able to bring things on paper, okay? And again, going through the questions will give you a certain idea. I've only done it for 2023. Again, for the people, especially till your Sunday, I just would say at least 4 or 5 years, you do it at your end. When we start our classes from Monday, again, tomorrow also we'll do certain aspects of silviculture. So then you will have some familiarity. You would know, acha, this question was asked in certain year. Okay, so the more involved you are, your output from the classes would increase itself, fine? So that is also something we will have a look at, right? So my point is, this is something while we'll also do in the classes, but again, this is where you should also put your efforts in. Try to write them down separately as much as possible, okay? And this is also where some reading, etc. would help, right? For the concepts, etc., this will be done, and if you understand the concept well, you will be able to write it, fine? But definitely try to show things via diagrams. This always helps, okay? And wherever possible, if there is any keyword in any notes, in any book, etc., you are finding it, if you are not aware about it, Google. There has been a trend every year. They will ask you to, as a 5 terms they'll ask, just define them. And sometimes we may not be very clear about it. So whatever things you are encountering, try to keep a tab of that, okay? So if you understand this part here, so then the answer writing here is not a rocket science, okay? Because again, being a technical optional, you have to first exactly address the demands of the question, okay? And in fact, when I end the session for today, I'll take 1 or 2 questions, and there also I'll tell you how to make that answer better, okay? I'll show you a general way to do it, and then I'll also show you a specific way while mentioning some of the important species. So that will also give you an idea. Address the demands, okay? Here also, as much as possible, be specific. How can you be specific? You know the exact definitions. You don't beat around the bush, okay? Again, for example, if there's a question on mangroves, okay? So mangroves, you can then mention the definition or the aspects of champion and Saith classification, some important mangrove species varieties, even if not explicitly asked, okay? If there's a question on cold desert, you can show the parts of Ladakh, Himachal, where we'll find cold desert. In cold desert, for example, we find sea buckthorn, okay? Half sea buckthorn, right? So this is how some of the things, again, the more you revise it, the better you will get at it. So again, this is all we have to do, okay? And in some questions you will see, for example, they will ask you modern applications, okay? Now, there are certain kind of questions that are sometimes you do not cover in your syllabus. Last year, there was a question on precision silviculture. Maybe they'll ask you the recent trends in forestry, in silviculture, modern nursery techniques, etc. Okay? So here, for example, this is again an applied aspect of remote sensing. We have, and you would have maybe read about precision agriculture, okay? Or precision farming, precision irrigation. From that, if one is able to borrow, okay? So there will be some questions you definitely know, you have to do them as best as possible. For other questions which are more application oriented, right? If you have a good command on syllabus, you can even list the points of the syllabus, tailoring it to the demand of the question, okay? So for example, if a question is, what are the objectives or what is the objective of silviculture, I know what are the all the syllabus components. That all is ultimately in one way or the other the management, or that is the objective of silviculture, right? So again, through good command on syllabus, okay, and again these specific part that we have outlined, you'll be able to overall address the demands well, okay. So that is one. सोहन आप ये अपना डाउट पूछ लीजिएगा, नो इश्यूज. जो नंबर है आप एक बार मुझे मैसेज करिएगा, आफ्टर द क्लास वी कैन डिस्कस. आपको झारखंड फॉरेस्ट सर्विसेज के लिए अगर यू वांट एनी गाइडेंस. खाजी, अगर आपका कोई स्पेसिफिक क्वेश्चन है आप पूछ लीजिए. आई एम हैविंग अ लुक एट दिस कमेंट सेक्शन ऑल्सो. ओके, पेपर 2 का जो the other part is this, perhaps we can do it in the coming days, because again here the kind of questions that are asked, some of the questions almost repeated, some directly from the syllabus. So our philosophy has to be, whatever is directly asked, whatever we can do, we should be able to maximize as much as possible, okay. That should be the rule of the game, okay. The things which are getting repeated, which are in the syllabus, you should not miss out, fine. And this also is where we'll try to have an all idea, okay. So my first homework to all of you who are watching this and perhaps will watch it, try to have this thing and go through the syllabus at least twice or thrice and draw a mind map like this. So whenever, and stick it on your table. So from then now, because otherwise you may not be aware about certain sections. So if you see this overall mind map, there are overall 16 nodes in this. 4 here, 4 here, 4 here and 4 here. Okay, as many nodes as you close, that will show to you a visual depiction of how much part you have done, okay. So for example, you are starting with 0 out of 16. The idea is to do it as much as possible, so the best would be 16 out of 16, that in all the sections you have a fair bit of idea, okay. So this is something that you can do, right? Now we'll go into the more specifics here. We'll start with our section A, the aspects of silviculture general here, okay. Now in the silviculture general, this is the entire syllabus that you see, okay. You have a very important part of ecological and physiological factors influencing vegetation, okay. Today I'll tell you the major forest types also in India. Tomorrow we'll see this in more detail. Ecological and physiological factors influencing vegetation. In this just one unit, many different kind of questions can be answered, okay. Because when we say ecological factors, this can include the factors related to climate. Within climate, multiple factors. This can include factors related to soil. Soil factors are known as edaphic factors. This can include factors related to topography. This can also include factors related to biotic factors, which means between species and humans and wild animals, etc., their interactions. We'll see this in more detail. Physiological factors can be, for example, photosynthesis, how that is impacting availability of water, availability of nutrients. For example, if there's a drought or if there's very harsh conditions, what are the different mechanisms? So this is where, for example, when we talk about arid and semi-arid regions of India, okay, let's say talk about Rajasthan. In Rajasthan, we have khair species, khejri trees, for example, right? So what adaptations do these trees have is all the physiological adaptations that have happened. So the roots would be different. So when we talk about, for example, Acacia catechu or other acacia species, for example, the roots would be slightly more dispersed to better adapt. So this is how you will understand. This is only the first unit, okay. Another important part which we'll also briefly touch upon tomorrow is natural and artificial regeneration, fine. Methods of propagation. So when these two parts, the first 2 units take slightly more time, other 4 parts, because this is where your foundation knowledge is getting built, right? Now artificial and natural regeneration of forest. So here we'll see how through seeds forest can be generated. When I say artificial, which means through seedlings from a nursery, okay, or through grafts, different mechanisms, right? From root suckers, from coppice, etc. This is how the forest can be regenerated. Different methods of propagation, different grafting techniques here also. Every second year you will see a question from this particular part. Okay, different site factors. Now nursery is again a very important part. Okay, all the stages that happen in a nursery. Okay, right from the maintenance of seed processing, seed grading, seed storage, etc. Everything important. Okay, different planting techniques, advantages and disadvantages we'll have a look at. Nursery beds, types of nursery beds, maintenance of poly bags, etc. Fine. Water budgeting, grading and hardening. By the way, we'll also see terms like what is hardening off. This term also many times has been asked by in the exam. Okay, different approaches. Then establishment and tending. Now very shortly, when I define to you what is silviculture, I will say silviculture includes establishment, it includes development, it includes care, it includes reproduction. Okay, but you will get to understand this in more detail in last unit. Then tending. In tending operations, different, be it cutting, thinning, pruning operations, followed by overall aspect here, that what things have to be done to maintain a stand of forest. Okay, so this is the overall area, and again I'm telling you this every year out of 200 marks in paper 1A, you can see from 60, 70, even 75 marks of silviculture general. So this has a high return. Of course, it is conceptual. There is a lot of things to be done, a lot of examples, and because this is the foundation, even in a crash course, for this we'll spend some more time, because when you are very thorough with this ultimately founds the base for every other topic. Okay, so that is why this is important. And by the way, we cannot directly jump with ecological and physiological factors, because even that, for that I have to overall tell you some important things. Okay, so let me just start some important aspects here. Okay, we'll start, for example, with silviculture. So I'll just give you the brief outline what we are going to do. Okay, in the coming, let's say in this class here, we will just basically understand silviculture. So when we do that, we'll see definitions. We will see objective of silviculture. Okay, we'll see some terms like sylvics. Okay. Now, a very simple definition of silviculture can be, it is the art or the science of management of forests. Okay. So after we are done with this, we will then go into forests. Okay, how do we define forests in India? Recently, you would have also heard about the Forest Conservation Amendment of 2023. Again, Godavarman case way back of 1996, again in news. We'll also have a look at this. Okay, and we'll also have a look at the forest types in India. We'll also look at the role of forests. In this part also, questions have been asked, right from the types of forests in India to the role or the benefits or the ecosystem services they provide. Okay, then we'll also have a look at some important terms related to trees, shrubs, herbs, some very basic terms that generally you'll come across. Okay, although terms, we'll also see some terms tomorrow and in the coming classes also, right? Because again, being a technical optional for each of the specific topics also, you may see one or two terms here and there, right? So whatever terms you're doing, again, my one more tip to you is have a glossary of terms. So two things I've asked you to have separate, or maybe when you take or do the lecture, you can just go through this. Okay, you will get the PPTs and the all the scribblings, jottings that I make. One is to have a list of all the important terms. Second is to have the diagrams, case studies and examples. Okay, other than that, I think most of the things you will be able to understand. That is all we'll discuss. Fine. Now, so firstly we'll talk about the silviculture aspect here. Okay, what is the definition of this? What is the objective? What is sylvics? Okay, so here there are three definitions. The one which seems easiest to you, you can remember. In fact, I would say if you just remember this keyword, your job is done. EDCR. And in similar way, we'll see a lot of short mnemonics which will make your job easier. Okay. What is silviculture? EDCR. What is EDCR? Establishment, development, establishment, development, care and reproduction of stands of timber. Okay. This is a definition by James W. Tourney and Courtian. Silviculture is a branch of forestry that deals with establishment, development, care and reproduction of strands of timber. This is all you need to remember. Okay. There are other definitions also. I'll just tell you. In fact, I find this to be the easiest if you remember EDCR. If you do not remember this, another simple definition is scientific, which means the science and the art of management of forests. Okay. The scientific and the artful practice of growing, cultivating trees and the forest. Very simple definition. Okay. The primary objective of this is to have, now 3 dimensions are there: ecological, economic and social goals aimed at managing and enhancing forest ecosystems. Now if you see these 3 dimensions, okay, the dimensions are economic, ecological and social. Isn't this that you also see as sustainable development? Okay. So whenever you are stuck, for example, that what is the aim or objective of silviculture, think from economic angle. You also have a topic known as forest economics. Okay. Forest management, where we have to try to maximize the timber produce, non-timber forest products, etc. That is the economic part. Ecological, which is related to conservation of biodiversity, species, other related aspects. Social, here think about people, tribal groups who are dependent. Think about joint forest management. Okay, livelihoods of people, right? So when we're talking of silviculture, okay, so the approach of silviculture has changed. So initially when the Britishers used to govern, right, their approach was only limited to the economic aspect, okay, which led to ecological degradation also, which also led to social issues, eviction of tribals, etc. For that also we have, for example, the Forest Rights Act. Okay, for ecological conservation, better management, we have the Forest Conservation Act. Okay, we already had the Indian Forest Acts, by the way, right? So the point is, this intersection is important, and as a silviculturist, they have to ensure all the 3 are done. Okay, that is why it is art and science. Science because a lot of scientific management and principles have to be done. Okay, and art because again it's a skill, okay, which has to be done. A lot of practical application is also there. So theory and practice both is an important part of silviculture. Okay, there is another definition by R.S. Troop, if you just want to have a look at. Okay, process by which the crop which is constituting a forest, these are tended, removed, replaced by new crops, okay, resulting in the production of wood. Now again, in the first definition you see the focus is exclusively on the economic aspect, right? That is why I would say these 2 definitions are even better. This is what we can go through and focus on. Okay, so this is how we can define what is silviculture as a very basic aspect here, right? That is what we can know. Now moving forward, we will have a look at these diagrams in more detail as we move along in generation and in silviculture systems and forest management, right? For example, you have this part here, a mature hardwood forest. You cut it for the first time, okay? After then 20-30 years, the remaining trees, etc., they will grow through. Again another cut, okay? You'll get another set, right? Another 20-30 years, you have removed another 30% of trees. So this is how, in one example, the management of let's say forest is happening, okay, and this will depend. Okay, for example, in this case you see the trees are of different heights. I'll tell you a term also known as forest stands. Stands can be even aged, they can be uneven aged. Okay, we'll also see that, but the point is in different areas, different silviculture practices are used. Okay, so again, based on those conditions, there is a total overall setup that is needed. Fine. Now, what is the objective? Many times this question has been asked. Okay, so for once and for all, for questions and topics like this, I will give you an overall write-up that you can directly download. Okay, but just for our reference, for our mind, what should be the part here? What is the objective of silviculture? Broadly, you have to think in 3 dimensions: economic, environmental, social. And from that you can draw different branches. Okay, economic would be to maximize, for example, timber produce. Okay, even for example the non-timber forest products. Okay, economic can be to overall increase the yield. Environmental can be, or the ecological aspect can be overall, for example, preservation of biodiversity. Okay, then perform ecosystem functions. Other environmental factors of silviculture can be what? Environmental objective can be even mitigate against climate change. Okay. Another aspect for social, of course, we can talk about overall livelihoods of people. Okay, we can talk about integration of the social aspect into the overall forestry, so that the people's livelihoods, their lives, etc. are not endangered by the exploitation of these forests. Okay, this is a broad way to think about it, right? Now when we look at just the keywords, you have to focus. Okay, the explanation, etc. of course is more than self-explanatory. So here, for example, idea is sustainable forest management. Directly forest management is in your paper 2A. Directly we can use it. Okay, so you are talking about the long-term health, productivity of the ecosystem, ecological, economic and social factors. Fine. So sustainable forest management is one of the objective. Restoration of the ecosystem, another objective. This is the ecological aspect of it, right? Here, for example, you can restore degraded or disturbed forests. Again, think about central India. In central India, in some degraded areas, let's say we go for timber plantations. We go for sal plantations. Now, for example, from now, if I use sal, you can write down Shoria robusta. Now, one more thing I have to clarify, because I've mentioned again a scientific species. Whenever we will write down the scientific species in the class, okay, and in your answers, for example, this was the common name sal. I had written Shoria robusta. We have to underline it also. Now ensure the first word, the first letter has to be capital. In the second word, the first letter does not have to be capital. Okay. So this is how you'll write it: Shoria robusta. Underline both of them separately. Okay. Another example, for example, if I can write here, for example, okay, instead of mango, I'll just write down here teak. Teak, for example, is Tectona grandis. So what we can do? We will underline this. This you have to make a habit. Okay. These two examples are again these are again for used in timber plantations. Teak being used in many parts. In fact, if I talk about Kerala also, here you also read about Nilambur teak. In parts of central India, etc., sal. Even in parts of Odisha, in Simlipal, in all these areas, we'll see a lot of sal being there. Okay. So slowly and steadily we will build upon this knowledge also. Okay. But because we have just mentioned it, so from now you'll have and you'll write it exactly like this. And if you're not sure about the spelling for whatever reason, definitely cross check. No point of writing the wrong spelling. Okay. So the restoration of the ecosystem, Very important in timber production. Now you can write the example of Tectona, for example, Tectona grandis. Okay. High quality timber products, we want to maximize it. Okay. Selecting suitable tree species. Okay. Now, in this ecosystem restoration, a very important point is mentioned involving planting native tree species. Native tree species. Here also I'll introduce to one more term. Okay. There is always a debate between the native indigenous varieties versus the exotics. Okay. Which is also a very interesting topic. We prefer or we use exotics because of their functions, use value. They will grow very fast. Okay. The regeneration time for them is very low. For example, if we talk about eucalyptus, this can grow within 10 years. But if you go a proper teak plantation, this can even take up 60, even 80 or even 100 years. Okay. But the problem with that exotics is this is going to harm the environment. This will take more water than required. So this will be very much harmful to the ecosystem. Okay. Whereas if we plant the indigenous or native varieties, our ecosystem is going to be intact. So now if you are a silviculturist, if you are drawing a forest working plan, so ideally one should go for this. Okay. As much as possible use the native variety species. This will ensure the agroclimatic zone balance also. So this is how you can understand. Fine. Again, helpful for conservation of biodiversity. Okay. Now here also sometimes when we go for plantations, okay, I again give you the example. In plantations, if we only go for single species, that is not good for biodiversity. First of all, please remember, natural forest is not equal to plantation, or plantation is not equal to a natural forest. Okay. While from very far away you may see a green color, you may see forest, but the overall impact, a natural forest will have far higher biodiversity because of mixed nature of species. Plantations does not have a mixed nature of species. Okay. So that is one. Okay. So that is why when you do silviculture, you want to maximize the biodiversity, you want to conserve it as much as possible. That's the overall idea, right? Then wildlife habitat enhancement. So this again is a part here, that how we can safeguard the wildlife. Okay, how we can overall improve this part here, be it vegetation, understory, be it water sources, okay, or be it, so again we can create diverse habitats. Okay, that can be through silviculture. Again, because climate change is a big part, so appropriate silviculture can help even in carbon sequestration and even in climate change mitigation. Okay. And for example, if we go for precision silviculture, this can even be done. Okay. Because we already know for the forests, let's say Amazon rainforest, etc., these are the lungs of the earth. They sequester a lot of carbon. If this is done well, of course, we will sequester a lot of carbon, right? It can also be done helpful for soil and watershed protection. Again, see, what am I doing? I am using the terms from the syllabus. What soil, water conservation, watershed, etc., environment conservation, these are the terms. So that is how, if you're short on points, go back to the syllabus, you will generate a lot of points. Okay. So they are helpful. Okay. Silviculture can be used for protection of watershed, or for overall soil also, right? Then for recreation and aesthetics also. Okay. So if we create visually appealing forest, it can even enhance tourism, recreational activities, hiking, camping, etc., bird watching. Okay, this can also help. This can also be a lot of, it is a field of continuous research and innovation. Okay. So again, remember things like tree improvement. Okay. Or we understand the stand dynamics, how to create better stands, which will ultimately give higher yield. Okay. So even that can be an object that you do a particular plantation over to understand the area better. Fine. That can be there. Community livelihoods also, right? So here also, if we see, This is the social aspect to it, that community livelihoods to be integrated and ensured. You can link that to sustainable development also. Okay. And another important part is pest and disease management. So when we do the biotic factors, right, there also we'll see this, that the strategies of this pest and disease will also include resistant tree species, okay, stand density, etc. Because ultimately if we manage the pest and disease better, so again we will have higher yield. Otherwise we've already seen so many pest attacks being very detrimental. Example like sandalwood spike disease, for example, responsible for at least destruction of 5 to 10% of sandalwood species, okay, if this is not well controlled, right? So that is one aspect. Okay, so far we have seen what is silviculture, we have seen overall what are the objectives of silviculture, right? Another very small part is what is the difference between silviculture and sylvics. SILVICS. Okay, so in a very simple tabular form, if you get a question like this, you can mention this. Okay, so what is silviculture? Silviculture is, again, of course we know, EDCR, branch of forestry. Directly we'll talk about this. Whereas sylvics, for our understanding, of course you can remember, it is a part, or it is a part of silviculture. Okay, so here it is particularly with respect to the environmental factors. Okay, so what is sylvics? History, life history, general characteristics of forest trees and crops with particular reference to environmental factors. Particular reference to environmental factors. Now again I've told you, in silviculture you will have theory, you will have application. So the theory part is sylvics. Okay, practice and theory combined is silviculture. So silviculture is a broader set. For our understanding we can see, okay, sylvics can be the smaller set, silviculture can be the bigger one, wherein sylvics talks about the theory. Okay, theory and practice is a silviculture. Okay, of course silviculture is a broader term, this is a narrow term. Now we have seen the sylvics definition directly being asked. Okay, so don't take these definitions lightly. Okay, exact definition you should remember. You don't have to remember all the 5 points, maybe 3 points, 4 points. If you know, that is good enough. Okay, these 3 points are very organic, they draw upon itself, right? Then for example here you are directly, for example, sylvics is the study of tree and forest units as biological units. Okay, overall related to vegetation, because this is related to overall environmental factors. Whereas in silviculture you talk about everything, okay, which includes the methods of tending, regeneration. Okay, overall it covers everything, which includes the theory as well as the practice. But this is only the study, that is only the theory. This is both theory as well as practical. Fine. So again, this is the application part, this is the principle or the theory part. That's all we have to know. Fine, has been asked previously, so again that is why we are seeing it. Fine. Now if you get a question on applications of silviculture or overall branches of silviculture, you can draw a simple diagram like this. Okay, so what we are seeing, silviculture, if you see this very closely, this is again related to your different components of syllabus. Mensuration 2A, management 2A, forest protection 2B, you can even mention forest soils, okay, forest economics, forest utilization, and you can even add more components like we have done. Okay, for example, we can even talk about the legislations, the law part of it. Fine. So if you see silviculture overall, silviculture again happens to be very multidimensional. Okay, so and it is again related to all these aspects. Fine. So that is first of all the overall part that you have to know. So I just want to see overall here how many people, I hope you have been able to follow. Fine. So till here is what we understand through this particular part. Okay, be it mensuration, management, protection, soil, economics, utilization, this is how this is connected. And again, when you draw something like this, later on when you're done with these components, you can add smaller branches for more sub points. Okay, So this will even add more weight. Fine. So that you see overall silviculture here. What is the whole idea behind this? Fine. Now, let us move to another very interesting topic, which is the forests here, right? And in doing so, let me just firstly talk about, just a second. Okay. Let me just first tell you about the recent part here related to the forest, and then I'll go to the terminologies. Fine. Now, this is again a very recent article, and this had been in the news for prelims also. You would have read about it. Okay. Supreme Court restores 1996 definition of forests. What was so special in 1996? We had the very famous Goda Varman case. Okay. Now, the context of this also is the recent amendments in the Forest Conservation Act. We have the Forest Conservation Act of 1980. So there have been amendments. Now you have the Forest Conservation Act of 2023. Okay. So what has happened overall? Supreme Court restores the 1996 definition of forest. So according to this Goda Varman part here, anything which resembles the dictionary definition of forest will be deemed to be a forest. Okay. Now you may wonder what is the main issue here. The issue I'll tell you. In India, we already have the Indian Forest Act of 1927. Because again, we are talking a lot about forests. So just also let us know the legal or the technical aspect here. In Indian Forest, okay, Act, there is a classification that is done. Okay. You have the reserved forests. You have the protected forests, village or the revenue forests. Okay. So these are properly recorded and they are given. So these are statutorily recorded. Okay. Other than that, from the Forest Conservation Act, any land that is diverted from a non-forestry purpose to a forestry purpose, or again I can say from a forestry to a non-forestry purpose, is for that you need the approval of center, right? So originally and overall the definition has been, or the government's viewpoint had been, that whatever is recognized statutorily, okay, or whatever has been recorded in the government books is to be treated as a forest. But according to the Goda Varman case, now this of course you will include as a definition of forest, but you would also include the dictionary definition of forest. So whatever is also not included officially or by law, but still meets the definition, dictionary definition of forest, is also going to be covered under the ambit of Forest Conservation Act. So what it does, it increases the ambit of conservation. So this is good from the ecological point of view. It increases the ambit, okay, of overall forest protection. Fine. So this is one thing we'll overall remember and understand. Now, if we are very clear about this particular part, second thing to understand here is, so of course we know that what is the current state. Indian Forest Act, you have the three, and this again of course I'm not going too much detail because you've already done it, right? So Indian Forest Act, three basic classifications. Whatever is recorded here is deemed to be a forest. In addition to this, Forest Conservation Act, whatever is recorded as per the government document. Additionally, dictionary definition is to be also regarded as a part here. Okay. Now, another part that we'll just also have a look at in this manner is going to be the forest types in India. For this, you have to remember Champion and Sate, the classification. So Champion and Sate had given the classification in 1968. Fine. in this classification, what is done? There are 16 types of forest overall mentioned, and these are clubbed into 5 groups. Okay. So first of all, let us see the 5 groups, and then we'll try to know more. Okay. So first of all, we have the tropical forests. We have the subtropical, montane forests. We have the temperate montane forests. Okay, we have subalpine forests, and lastly, I hope you're able to see this also, the last part here is going to be the alpine. So if we again count, these are the 5 classifications or the 5 groups. Okay, in these 5 groups you have the 16 different types, and it is in the tropical forest you have the maximum types. Here you will have the 7 types, okay, followed by 3 types here, another 3 types, okay, and then the last you'll have 2 types, etc. So one by one we will have a look at this. Okay, so just let me make this a little slightly shorter so that we can club all these things in one. Okay, now here if you see, when we talk about the tropical forests, okay, you have, of course, we have evergreen forest, we have deciduous forests, we have littoral and swamp forests, we also have the tropical thorn forests. Okay, now of course I had said there are 7. Now how it is 7? So evergreen, so you have wet evergreen, you have semi evergreen, okay, and you have moist evergreen. Wet evergreen, semi evergreen, moist evergreen, this is 3, overall 3. Okay, for deciduous you have moist deciduous, you have dry deciduous. Okay, so this is 3, this is 2, 5, then 6 is littoral and swamp forest, and last is tropical thorn forest. Okay, again I'll repeat, see, evergreen and deciduous. Okay, we know that evergreen, in deciduous there is going to be a very specific time where they're going to shed their leaves, where in evergreen this will shed leaves throughout the year. There is no specific season as such. But in deciduous forests, okay, or deciduous trees overall, they will have specific, and especially this is done to conserve water. Okay, again, so in evergreen you have wet evergreen forest, you have semi evergreen forest, you have moist evergreen. In deciduous you have moist and dry. Okay, you have littoral and swamp forest, and lastly you have tropical thorn forest. Okay, and again as we move along, and finally in the respective chapters we'll also see some more examples for these varieties. Okay, that is one. Then you have subtropical montane forest, then you have temperate montane, and you have the other aspects here, right? Now when we are talking about the subtropical, okay, so here you have 3 again types here: broadleaves, pine, and dry evergreen. Okay, this has broad-leaved forest, okay, pine, and overall dry evergreen forests. Fine. For temperate mountain, I'll just overall tell you, you have in yes, in temperate mountain we have again 3: wet temperate, moist, and dry. Okay, there is wet temperate, we have Himalayan dry temperate, and we have Himalayan, moist, temperate. This may take time if you do it for in the first instance, but this question has also been asked previously. Just do it once, okay? And this will again save a lot of time. Fine. Then you have subalpine forest. Okay, so here just it is written exactly like this. We have subalpine forests. Okay. Now in alpine you have moist and you have dry. So you have moist alpine scrub and you have dry alpine scrub. Okay. First of all, be very familiar and thorough. In fact, after the class also, at least try to draw this once or twice, because at the first very go, you will not be able to remember it. Fine. If you are done with this, tomorrow and in other classes for each of the parts, I'll also tell you some very prominent examples. Okay. In fact, tomorrow when we do the altitudinal variation, okay. So right from the plains as we move up top, okay. So right from the what are the important conifer, okay. For example, we have the important Populus deltoid species, okay, A.V. spindro, Pinus roxburghi. But again, right now, you may not be able to absorb everything in the very first class, okay. So again, the class will be structured. So tomorrow, some examples you will see, day after tomorrow or in the next week, some more examples. But this is one thing you have to understand. Again, I'll repeat, 16 types, okay, 5 groups, champion and sage classification, 1968, okay. Now, champion and sage classification is also going to be important. For example, if we get a question on mangroves, we will define mangroves, etc. through the definition or classification of champion and sage. Okay. So now when I'll talk about the specific part of mangroves in this particular unit, I'll also brief that to you. Okay. So I hope till here you are able to follow. Fine. So before I go to the terminologies part, let me just brief whatever we have seen. Apart from the overview of the syllabus and the previous paper of 2023, we have seen so far what is silviculture. In silviculture, of course, we've seen the definition through EDCR, right? We have seen the objectives of silviculture, around 10-11 points with examples, okay? So after the class, this is how you have to recall, how many points you're able to recall. In that, easiest way to remember is through this. Economic, environmental, social, okay, the aspects related to silviculture. Then we also saw what is sylvics and difference between silviculture and sylvics, okay. Now other than that, we just have also saw, talking of forests, we can go into the legal definitions. Here if you get a question, you have to mention the Godavarman judgment. When we discuss the forest legislations part, I'll go into the more details here. But if you have, and by the way, most of you have already done this in your prelims also, because this was a very important update. Okay, this is one legal part we have done for forest. We have also seen the forest types in India now. Okay, so again, when you have to ultimately summarize, and this is also for each of the lectures, I'll also help you summarize and effectively retain information. So till now, if you're able to, in some sense, have an idea about this, so you are on the right track. Fine. In the forest types, remember our keyword 16, 5 and 1968. 1968 reminds me of C and S, champion and sate. And now your job has to be remember the 5. You can either use a mnemonic, okay, or perhaps you can easily remember it right from tropical, okay, to montane forest. And in that also we've seen the different parts here, right? Tropical, subtropical montane, temperate montane, subalpine, alpine, okay. This is how you have to remember this whole part here. So till now we have covered this part, okay. Now let us go back to another very interesting part here, and this is again where we'll go back and discuss some of the very foundational aspects, okay. Okay, let us just for some brief time go through some terminologies, okay. Let's see how ultimately you have a finally tree, and then what is a forest overall, right? How we can define these terms here. To understand this, okay, you have to remember everything starts with ultimately a seed, okay. We start with a seed, then seed becomes a seedling, a sapling, a pole, P-O-L-E, okay, which ultimately would become at some point of time a tree. This is the entire stage, okay. In this stage, of course, there will be germination part that will happen, okay, right. So that is one. Second thing which we'll also see now is a very simple part, okay. You know this part, you know this part, and you know this part. This, of course, very simple part, of course, is root. This is the part, the stem part here. This part is your crown. And now we will see slightly more details here. The crowns can also be different. For stems, what are the things to be known? For the very first lecture, I am going to confine myself only to these definitions, very simple definitions. As we move along, for example, when we do the physiological aspects, we'll also see the defects of stems, roots, different types. Okay, so when we see different adaptations, okay, we'll see buttress roots, okay, stilt roots, prop, other types of roots and other examples associated. We know root, we know stem, we know crown. This is generally how things are. And seed, seedling, sapling, pole here, okay. Other than that, you also hear terms like herbs, shrubs, and trees. These terms have been asked, so again, for our basic understanding, we should know about it. So in the next 10-15 odd minutes, we'll just revise some basic terminologies with some diagrams. This is again a part where from now you have to be very active. We will see some diagrams at this point of time, okay. Now, one by one, this is something you can also try to practice. Again, we'll share these slides along with the annotations with you, so don't worry, fine. Because again, I remember this is a crash course. I'll go through some of the things, only the most important things I'll dictate to you, okay. So again, when I overall come to the end of the lecture, there will be a small dictation that I want you to have, exactly with examples, some important points. Now, seed is your main part here. We start with the seed, fine. There is a process of germination goes on. You can also live draw along with me. The more receptive you are, the more you write, the more engaged you will be, fine. This becomes a seedling, right. So here the leaf growth, the beginning of this is going to start. After this, if the size, this becomes bigger, this becomes a sapling, okay. It becomes mature. Ultimately, this becomes a tree. It starts to be a fruit, okay. Now, when I say it starts to be a fruit, this is where I'll just also tell you, there are two terms also that you should know, just for your reference. For example, there is something known as gymnosperms and angiosperms. Okay, so gymnosperms, they will have naked seeds. Here, these prominent examples can be your conifers. Whereas when we talk about angiosperms, these will have proper fruits, okay, fruits or overall parts visible directly. So the parts where you see the flowers or fruiting that is happening, we are talking about angiosperms, remember, okay. Gymnosperms are your examples of conifers, okay. If you want to write, I am giving you 2 or 3 very good examples of conifers, okay. ABs, Pindro, again conifers will again come tomorrow in many other classes, so don't worry. ABs, Pindro, one very good example of conifer. Pinus, Roxburghi. Notice how I am underlining, how I am writing, okay. For now, 2 examples, we'll also discuss chair pine, we'll also discuss other varieties. For now, because I've mentioned it, you can just write that down, okay. Other 2 examples till now I've given you Shorea robusta, Tectona grandis, both teak species, okay, right. So gymnosperms will have naked seeds, whereas angiosperms, again, they will have proper flowers, fruits, fruiting, okay. So you have a seed, germination to a seedling, sapling, maturity happens, flower, nut, etc. This reproduction happens. Now either this will decay, or sometimes what will happen, from this tree itself, the seed will fall down, and after that the regeneration happens. Please note, if the regeneration happens directly because of the natural seed, that is known as natural regeneration. Okay, we have not used anything from outside. Okay, so directly if the reproduction part, this is a part, okay, happens from the seed itself, when it falls down, this is known as natural regeneration. Okay, and again we will see natural and artificial regeneration in proper detail in our coming lectures. Fine. A very simple part to know here. Another very simple part to know here is this herb. You have a shrub, you have a tree. Okay, now here we can segregate this into two. One is the height part of it, and other part is, does it have wood or not. Okay, herb, the height is going to be less than 1 meter, very short in height. Okay, and again these are kind of diagrams, sometimes they directly ask you the difference between herb, shrub and tree. Okay, one should know height is less than 1 meter. For shrub it is going to be less than 6 meters, only if I'm saying height. For tree it is going to be greater than 6 meters height. Okay, and of course you know this is the part trunk. Okay, and this is the part that is known as canopy. Okay, assuming that some of you will be very new to the subject, that is why these terminologies we are seeing. Canopy. Okay, and canopy management itself is an art, we'll also see that. Fine. So herb is there, shrubs and tree. Okay, only one thing till now I've told you, this is related to the height. Okay, but there is something even more, which is now this is a woody perennial. That is how you define a tree, as a woody perennial. You have the wood part here. Here you do not have the wood part. Okay, when you see the herb, whereas when you see the shrub, of course you have leaves here, but you can also see the stem, this part, and of course this lies in between these two extremes. Okay, so in herb the woody part is not here, in tree of course the woody part is here, that is you define this as a woody perennial, and in shrub for example it's a mix, that is how this is in between. Height wise we know this is going to be less than 1 meter, less than 6 meters, and this is going to be greater than 6 meters. Okay, another image I'll show you, and then we'll just write one line each, that should be there. Okay, this is again, that is how we've seen a tree, this is a shrub, this is a herb. You know, you should know the sequence. Okay, we know many important medicinal herbs also. So when we do paper 2B, we will write down a lot of names of important medicinal trees also and herbs also. Now in the forest exam, sometimes they ask you in the exam, write down the medicinal herbs, and sometimes they've asked you medicinal trees. So there is a difference between. So if you write a mixture of both, if the question is exclusively herbs, your marks can also be cut. Fine. So if this is set apart, remember like this. Okay, how we can write about trees, shrubs and herbs, right? So this is one part overall. Second is your climbers and creepers. Okay, now when we say about climbers, so for example if you think about the tropical rainforests, in tropical rainforest one of the main outstanding part which they already have is known as epiphytes. Okay, so let's say you have proper trees, there are epiphytes which grows on those trees. Okay, now because of the presence of those epiphytes, what is going to happen? The epiphytes will get structural support. Now in forest ecology also, you also see a term that is known as commensalism. So this epiphyte actually happens to be an example of commensalism. Okay, just for your reference how to visualize. Plus you have different creepers, again we have seen money plants, we have seen other climbers in the gardens, etc. So these are some of the plants that you generally read about. Okay, so these are, first of all we will write a list like this. Okay, right from herb, shrub, tree, climber, okay, twinner, creeper, etc. And for this I'll just make you write down one line each. Okay, so here for example if you were to write down only the keywords, when I said for herb our keyword has to be, this is non-woody. Okay, so now you can just write down one line. Herb is a non-woody plant with a short lifespan and soft stem. Okay, it has a very short stem and a short lifespan. Example you can just write here is basil. Okay, now shrub, because we've seen the example, this is woody in nature. In fact, one of the very prominent famous shrubs that you see a lot in the current affairs is the invasive species known as Lantana camara. Okay, so shrub, for you can write down, it is a woody plant which is shorter than a tree. It is a woody plant which is shorter than a tree. Okay, having multiple stems, typically having multiple stems, reaching up to the height of 6 meters. Reaching up to the height of 6 meters. Okay, example also we have seen, just the keywords woody plant. Okay, this herb, the major keyword has to be non-woody. Okay, short stem. Okay, one example also we have already seen. Now, for tree we will write down, it is a woody perennial. That is what we had written here. Woody perennial, height greater than 6 meters. Okay, so I'll just make you write down, please write down. It is a woody perennial plant with a trunk and a canopy. Okay, with a trunk and a canopy. Typically growing taller than 6 meters. Typically growing taller than 6 meters. Now we've seen many examples of tree. Write down any example. Okay, for example, Tectona grandis. That is teak. Okay, that is what you can write down. Then climber, from the very name you can just write, it is a plant with very long stems. You can see very long stem is there. Okay, it is a plant with very long stems that requires support to grow vertically. That requires support to grow vertically. Okay, this you can write. Example can be black pepper, used in different agroforestry systems. Twinner is again similar, it is going to twist, okay, around the different species. Okay, so twinner you can write down, it is a type of a climber. Twinner is a type of a climber that twists around a supporting structure. That twists around a supporting structure. Okay, this is what we can write. Then this last two, you have a creeper. Creeper, please note here, climber is going vertically, creeper is going in this side horizontally along the ground. Okay, that is what is the main part here that you have to remember. Again in the exam, if you just remember the keywords that we are writing, good enough. Many times questions like these are coming. This is the very foundational, the very basic part to remember. Okay, for a creeper, please write down, it is a plant that grows along the ground. Notice for all these things I'm saying a plant, right? It is a plant that grows along the ground. Plant that grows along the ground. Okay, right? So of course generally spreading horizontally, that is the main part here. Okay, and for epiphytes, I've just told you a very key characteristics of tropical rainforest: show or exhibit commensalism. Very famous example of this can be orchids. Okay, and they require big trees. For example, in tropical rainforest, what happens? There you have long trees with big canopies. So you will have these kind of epiphytes there for structural support. They will not take nutrition from this. They will only take structural support. That is the main part here. Okay. So again we have seen some terms. Okay. How things starts with a seed, seedling, sapling, right? Then some important terms that we have seen over here. Now this is again something you can draw. You start, of course you can take part here, you will start with a seed. After a seed we'll go to a seedling. After a seedling we'll go to sapling, then to a pole. Notice the term pole. Again in the next slide we'll see two terms. One is known as a pole, another term known as bole. Okay. For pole, remember, it is the part, this is the stem of a young tree. Whereas bole is the similar stem or a trunk for a tree that has matured. That is the only difference. You will see these terms again and again. Okay. Sometimes you will see the term trunk also, and this is the old matured tree, for example. Okay. Again, tomorrow or maybe in the next part, we'll also see forest succession in the same manner. Okay. How things start from the very basic, okay, nudation stage to the very final stage, to the subclimax in the middle, and then to the final climax community. Okay. So again, this is how we can talk about. So right from the seed, seedling, sapling, pole, this is how you can structure the main part here. All right. So that is one. Now, another part, just for our reference, we'll try to note. Okay. Now, when we talk about a stem, we had seen stem right now. Okay. This part here in the intermediate or the young stage, known as pole, P-O-L-E. Whereas when it gets matured, we'll say that as bole. Fine. If we have the cross section of the stem, there are few things that you generally see. Of course, this is something that we know mostly. Xylem and phloem. Okay. Xylem helping overall carry the water up to the other parts, and phloem for the nutrition from the parts of the leaves, etc. Right. So xylem and phloem again important for the point of conduction. That is important. For the secondary growth, there are also some terms here. Out of this, we are more interested in the bark part, so that we'll see in the other part here. Remember, for example, this cinchona. Okay, cinchona's bark was again important for the medical purposes also. The bark also plays an important role, right? Now, when we are talking of the crown, okay, please note the crown can be of different shapes and sizes. Okay, so generally when we talk about a tree, okay, let's say this is a shape of a crown. Okay, and for example, this is a sun. The shape of a crown will also have a huge bearing on how much radiation is getting absorbed. How much would that go to other parts? Okay, because again, if you understand crown, here this again is a very important part. I'll also explain this to you. Okay, so now you can see, and again when we do the stand structures, for example, let me just tell you one thing so that you see. One thing is crown can be of different shapes. We can have crowns as pyramids, okay, full crown, vase, fountain, spreading, weeping, layered. Okay, so again tomorrow when we do the conifer and other altitudes, I'll also make you write down crowns shapes for different species. Okay, that for example conifers have which type of crown shape. Okay, this is one important part here. Second thing very important is the differentiation that happens in a crown. Okay, to understand this, first of all, I'll just draw a part here so that you understand this better. Okay, now there are three terms that one has to know. One is dominant, one is dominated, and one is suppressed. This is totally dependent on the crown classification. Okay, so from here if you get to understand, and if we are able to draw, if you see the canopy, okay, the trees which are taller in size, which occupy the topmost canopy, they are seen as dominant. Okay, now dominant can also be divided in two parts. One is D1 and D2. And let's pay attention here. This has already been asked in the Indian Forest Services directly to define what is dominant, what is dominated, what is suppressed. Okay, so one can either you can draw or mention it in one line, but I would say define it, but also draw with the help of a diagram. Okay, and very easy to understand. It is totally based on the height part. Okay, so the topmost part that is occupied by the crown of the trees, that is known as, that is the dominant part. D2 is known as co-dominant. They occupy 5/6. Okay, so which means the total part, full part is the dominant, that is D1. D2 is the co-dominant part, that is still 5/6. Okay, then you have dominated. So this will follow below this if you follow the whole chronology. So this generally lie in the 3/4 range. Okay, and then at the last in the crown you have something known as suppressed. Okay, suppressed will lie at the bottom, and again this will be having challenges when they want resources, okay, like sunlight to come in. So this will be a challenge because most of the sunlight will be taken up by the other dominant, followed by co-dominant, followed by dominated. So in dominant, both these two things are there, D1 and D2. One is dominant and one is co-dominant. Okay, then you have dominated and then you have suppressed. So this is very easy to draw. You have to just change the size of the trees. The crowns also of this is going to change. Fine. So if you see the image here back, you have dominant, you have co-dominant, you have intermediate. Now for intermediate, what you can do, we can write this as dominated, followed by suppressed. Okay, and even shorter are shrubs and even lesser are herbs. And this of course is the ground cover. So this again is known as the crown differentiation, and this also is an important aspect of study of the important species. Okay, so crown one, we've seen there are different shapes of crown. Okay, there is a crown differentiation. Please remember the terms dominant, D1, D2, co-dominant. Remember dominated, and lastly is suppressed. Right, that is one thing we'll see. We just had a look at gymnosperms and angiosperms. Okay, right, gymnosperms, angiosperms, deciduous, evergreen, we just had a basic word on this. Okay, again as time goes on and as we see more trees, we'll see more varieties of deciduous, more varieties of evergreen trees, so on and so forth. For angiosperms, we just had a word, these will have visible fruits. Okay, flowering will happen. But gymnosperms, example like pine. Okay, I gave you example of Abies spindro, Pinus roxburghi, try to recall. Okay, now another important part here is this. Yes, we talk about the different rings that are there. Okay, now again if we have the cross section of the stem overall, there are multiple rings that are present, and even the age of the tree can be understood from here. This is generally understood through, there is a term known as dendrochronology. Okay, through dendrochronology one is able to understand this whole part here. Okay, now here in the past also we have seen this part again and again being asked. Xylem and phloem we've already done. Okay, now if you have to mention, or let's say if you get a question on this, there are some things you can remember. Okay, one thing you have to remember is the outer part, that is bark. Okay, bark is the most outer part, and in fact it is bark that protects the outside, okay, sorry, the inside of a tree, because bark is at the outside. Okay, and I gave you the example of cinchona, etc. There are bark, even the bark can be used for medicinal purposes, even economic purposes, right? That is one. Second, xylem and phloem we have already known. Okay, then you have something known as cambium. So cambium is this part, just it is when you go inside after the bark you have the cambium, and it is from here the tree starts to grow. Okay, Then there are rings that are here. Okay, of course, if you see this image also, there are certain rings. There are rings sometimes where very close, rings they are sometimes very far away. Okay, if the rings are very thin, okay, that means that the thin rings, basically, if you are seeing here very thin rings, there is not a lot of light or water for growth. It is not very much available. Whereas if you see very thick rings, which means light and water was abundant for growth, right? And we have understood that through these rings, one can even determine the age of a tree also, which is known as dendrochronology. Fine. There is another term that one also knows, okay, hardwood and sapwood. This has also been asked previously. So for your reference, just remember at the very interior or the core part, we have the hardwood, and at the outside we have the sapwood. Okay, there is a hardwood and there is a sapwood. Fine. Now here, if we have to overall say or mention, so it is the hardwood that has the dead hard center part. Okay, the hard, which is the dead and the center part, this is the hardwood, as we can see here. The sapwood, because from here also the tree will start to grow, it is the one which carries minerals and waters in the sap. Fine, that is the sapwood that is going to carry minerals and waters overall. Fine. So this is also something one can overall have an idea about. Okay, again, when I talk about a specific part here, we'll also include the tabular form of difference, another part of difference between hardwood and sapwood also. Fine. Now there are two more set of terms that we just want to have a look at, and then we'll move to the next part here. Now you have terms like forest. So now, discussing so much about the forest, again we'll see what is a forest, followed by what are species in general, what is a virgin forest, what is a high forest, what is a coppice forest, selection forest, what is a composition, what is a stand, because the next topic is the classification of forest. Forests are classified in 8 different parts. Okay, to understand that, we also need to know these terms and some of these terms, right? So here also, just one by one, like we have done for the previous part, we'll just go through some of the important definitions here. Okay, for forest, of course, they're not going to ask you the definition of forest, they'll mostly ask you the other aspects, but just for your reference, you can just know that again, it's a large area of land covered predominantly by trees and other vegetation, along with other flora and fauna. Okay, that is how we can know about it. Okay, now when we say species, okay, we've seen individual, population, species, ecosystem, biome, biosphere. Okay, so when we say species, for species, just 1 or 2 keywords you can write down. Okay, it is a group of similar organisms which are capable to interbreed. Okay, which are capable for interbreeding similar organisms. Okay, this is one thing that you can write down. Okay, just a second, I'll have a sip of water. Next, so species in forest, fairly easy. Virgin forest is a forest which remains undisturbed by human interventions. Okay, so only if you just see one keyword that you'll be able to recall. So what we are seeing with respect to the virgin forest here, it is a natural forest which has remained undisturbed from the human activities. That is defined as a virgin forest. But for us, high forest is more important to know. So I'm putting a star mark here. Coppice is also important. Okay. For high forest, these are the forests. You can just write down one line. A forest which is derived from seed. A forest which is derived from seed rather than other methods. Okay, like for example, the other method is, one of the method is coppicing. Other method can be related to the root suckers, for example. So for example, again, these terms we will again see in a topic of natural and artificial regeneration, and we'll also see advantages and disadvantages. But from the very first class itself, I'm telling you, for example, we have seen just now, these are forests. We've seen what is the seed. Here also, if the seed directly falls down, if the germination happens, And ultimately, if the forest comes about directly from the seed, it's a part of natural regeneration and it is known as a high forest. Okay, so we'll write a high forest is a forest that is derived primarily from a seed rather than the vegetative propagation. Okay. Then there is a coppice. Now coppice is simple for our understanding. For example, this is a tree. We cut it at its stump at a shorter height. Okay. And from that, when the regeneration happens, right? Multiple, so for example, this is how your tree was. If I just show you, this is the cross section, you cut it like this. You now have a short stump. From that, there are multiple outgrowths. Okay. And if you remember, again, we'll go back and I'll again just show you one more thing so that you have a connection. In the paper 1, remember this question? Botanical names of tree species, non-coppice, poor coppicers, good coppicers, strong coppicers. It is again linked to this part here. Okay. So this is again something we'll do again in natural and artificial regeneration. But from the very first lecture, I want to make it clear in which parts we'll see. So coppice is again when you cut the part here at a very short height. From that, multiple outgrowths happen, and then again it takes into the form and it grows. This is again, this is not a natural reforestation, this is a vegetative method of propagation. Okay. So here just one line. In coppice forest, trees are cut periodically. In coppice, trees are cut periodically back to the ground level to promote multiple shoots from stump. Okay. So this is what you can write down here. Fine. Then there are 3 more terms. Selection forest. You can, from the name itself, you can understand there is a selection that has been happening. How you want to have the forest to be. Okay. So again, I'll explain this to you, but we'll see this in detail in coming classes also. Composition is again how, for example, in a forest, maybe how the distribution of the different kind of trees in a forest is the composition. It can be based on age, it can be based on crown size, it can be based on other attributes. Okay. For stand also, we will just have a look at the stand can be even, a stand can be uneven. Okay. So here 3 terms we'll have a look at, and again we'll also see the images of this very shortly. For example, when we talk about the selection forest, so here just one line. A forest that is managed through a selection system. Okay, selection system is again something we do also in silviculture systems. Okay. So in a selection systems, the trees of different ages, okay, are harvested, or the trees of different ages are selectively harvested. So what happens? You will get a mixed kind of a stand. Okay, because let's say this is one tree, this is one tree, this is even one, this is one. Because the ages are different, you are harvesting them over a period of time with different ages. You will get a mixed kind of a stand. So in a selection for forest, what happens? Selection forest leads to a multi-aged stand. Multi-aged stand. Okay. Composition and stand, the other 2 are easier to remember. Composition, we can write down. It includes the variety and proportions of different tree species. It includes the variety and proportion. Variety and proportion of different tree species. Okay. And the last term is stand. For stand also, I think if I have an image, I'll also show that to you. Okay, this is a very good image to see. See, this is an even age stand. All the trees here are of the same age, so that is a uniform stand. Okay. You can also have an uneven age stand, and this is something you can easily draw. Okay, uneven age stand, like we can draw like this. Okay, different shapes and sizes, for example, right? This is an uneven edge stand. If the things are in the same part, this is the even edge stand, and we will see advantages and disadvantages of both when we talk about stand structure. Okay, but this again happens to be an important part, so this is also something we have to remember. Okay, right. So we have seen stand for we have seen composition, selection, coppice, high forest. Coppice and high forest, try to remember, right? Now there are some more terms that we'll just quickly have a look at. See, growing stock, in the coming slides I'm going to tell you, so we'll wait. Yield, rotation, regeneration, we will again see in silviculture systems also, and this is again a major part of paper 2A. In fact, this also, growing stock, etc., is also covered in more detail in 2A. Okay, for example, yield, from the very part from agriculture point of view also, you can think about what the yield should be. So for a forest also, what the yield will be. Okay, for rotation, regeneration, in fact there are a couple of more terms which are also sometimes confusing. Afforestation, even reforestation, right? So a yield part you already know. For rotation and these other parts, I'll just make you write down 1 or 2 lines each. Okay, rotation is simply, it is the period. Okay, for example, we say the rotation period of an X tree is 20 years, 30, 40, 50 years. So what is the rotation? The rotation is, it is the period required for a tree to reach maturity. Okay, rotation is the time, etc., for the tree to reach its maturity. So it is very important to know the rotation. So for example, if we are talking about a tract of land, okay, so where you have certain forests, so a proper silvicultural operation would be, let's say we cut down a part, some forests here, okay, or some trees here, for example. In the appropriate rotation, we want to have the maximized value. Okay, so here just again I'll repeat, it is the period required for a tree, period required, rotation is the period required for a tree or a stand to achieve the maturity and to be ready for harvesting. Okay, but and again see, we have to be very thorough with these terms. Okay, so if your basics are very clear, rotation period, rotation block, you will see so many times in the coming lectures. Fine. So it is ultimately the period of time which takes for the, let's say, tree or the stand to get ready to be harvested is the rotation. Okay, so that is one. And in fact, rotation can be determined. For example, if we want to maximize economic value, we will go for the, let's say, crops which have optimum rotation period for timber production. So it will depend on the timber also, it will depend on economic value. So there are multiple ways on which the rotation period depends. Okay, in coming classes we'll also see that. Talking about regeneration. Okay, now regeneration is also going to be dependent on many factors. Fine. In fact, when we talk about the classification of the forest, there also we talk about regeneration. Okay, for regeneration, very simple, remember I've told you, natural regeneration, artificial. Through seeds, if the regeneration happens, what you get is a high forest. Here, artificial, one of the examples can be a coppice forest. Okay, exotics, we just had a very brief discussion. When we discuss plantations in more detail, we'll see that. So again, one of the examples we saw, eucalyptus, they will have shorter rotation periods, okay, very faster growth. Because of that, again, and they are very ecologically productive, so because of that they are sometimes preferred for afforestation exercises, but again there can be some issues also. Then there are terms like growth, there is development, and then this is a very important part, phenology. Okay, for growth and development, again when we talk about growth, so growth can be the increase, okay, either in the diameter or in the height, in the girth, in all these attributes you can talk about the increase. Okay, so you can write down it includes height, diameter, volume or biomass over time, that is growth. Okay, the increase in the diameter, volume, biomass, that is one part here. Whereas development is the entire part of the journey through which it is the evolution which the forest will undergo. Okay, So here, and for this, if you want to remember, you can think about ecological succession. Okay, right from the very basic juvenile stage to an intermediate stage to the final stage, the entire trajectory which the tree or the ultimate forest will have to go through is how defined is as development. Okay, the last part is phenology. Tomorrow also we'll see phenology, in couple of other lectures we'll see phenology. Phenology is again the time which is taken. Okay, so related to flowering, when the flowering will happen, when the fruiting will happen, at what time. Now I'll just link it to the current context. Okay, now we are seeing increase of shortening of certain seasons, increase of more solar radiation, more global warming happening. So even the phenology is going to change, and it has already changed for some of the important varieties. Okay, so phenology is that specific part that when the flowering will happen, when the fruiting will happen. So again, sometimes because of changes in monsoon, because of impact of El Nino. Now 2023 was the warmest year on record. One of the reasons for that was El Nino. Okay, so this also affected the phenology, right? So phenology was also impacted by this. A question on this has already been asked once. We'll see this in, I think, tomorrow when we talk about the climatic factors. So again, then I'll discuss this in more detail. Impact of climate change on phenology. Okay, so here for phenology, just one line you can write. It studies phenology. See, it is logy. Logy is a study. Okay, so phenology is the study of seasonal changes. Phenology is the study of seasonal changes and periodic biological events. Seasonal changes and periodic biological events in trees, such as flowering, fruiting, and leaf shedding. Flowering, fruiting, and leaf shedding, these are the examples. Okay, in the bracket or in the just put a star mark, write down impact of climate change. So in the coming part, I'll also make a linkage with that. Fine. Okay, now before I move to the next part, just a very quick recap of this only section of the terms that we have seen. Okay, and also you have to try to, again, what if you're watching a lecture, if you're seeing your notes, try to be very active as much as possible. So we started in fact with this seed, seedling, sapling, maturity. Okay, we then went to herb, shrub, tree. I hope the difference is clear. We saw the different types of plants: herb, shrub, tree, climber, twinner, creeper, epiphytes. We then went into seed, seedling, sapling, pole, this whole context. Okay, we also saw the concentric structure of stem, and here of course we saw the different types or the shapes of crown. We also saw the different differentiation. We saw dominant. Okay, we saw dominant, dominated, codominant, suppressed, right? Angiosperms, gymnosperms, deciduous evergreen, we have seen that. Dendrochronology, heartwood, sapwood, for example. And then the different terms: stand, composition, selection, coppice. Again, see, this is the lecture number 1. Before the lecture number 2 also, and in between, in the initial lectures, you have to put in more effort so that some of the things which are very new to you, you are remembering it. And remember, you have to go this with the mindset of a sprint. Okay, if you are able to put in your best efforts, whatever be your capacity for the next 50-55 days, if you put in honest efforts, you will directly see good results. Okay, people have done this in the short span of time. They've covered 2 optionals, so there is no reason why as to you also cannot do it. Fine. This part we have seen: coppice, high forest, selection, composition. Okay, growing stock, yield, rotation, regeneration. Again, by the way, this is only the first part here. As we move along, you will get far more insights because these are covered in far more detail. Okay, but because I'm going to mention them again and again, so this is going to be my way of saying that some of the important parts that one you have to know. Fine. The debate between the indigenous and the exotics we had briefly covered once. Okay, however, we'll go to this in more detail. Okay, when we talk about the plantations, then we'll do both the advantages, disadvantages, a lot of points, the benefits which the exotic gives. Why are the exotics becoming so popular? Okay, right? That is one. Okay, now in this one more slide here, there are some more things I want to tell you. Right, canopy we have just seen. Right, we have also seen pole and bowl. Pollarding we'll see in the respective lecture. I'll tell this to you. So before I move to the next part here, let me just outline a couple of things here. Just a second. Okay. Because see, microclimate, photoperiod, etc. Tomorrow when we do the climatic aspect of this part here, this will be covered better. You will be able to understand. Meristematic cells are nothing but these are the new cells which come through. The terms that I've added here have been repeatedly asked in the exam. That is why you see here in this slide. Okay. Pruning these are all the example of tending operations. Okay. So when there is more, let's say this is a tree, there is a lot of outgrowth, you have to cut down some aspects. There is tending, there is pruning, there are different operations which go through. Okay. So this is an aspect we'll do in tending operations. Just remember the word pruning. Okay. Cutting down, let's say there is an outgrowth which happens. The tree which is there, it will grow vertically also, but it can also grow horizontally. So there is an outgrowth. So this part has to be consistently trimmed. Okay, because otherwise you would have seen if this is not done properly, it can even collide, it can even change the canopy or even the stand density. That can be a problem. Okay, so that is one major part here that you also understand, right? Then pole and bowl, I hope that part is already clear. During the young stages, the stem part is known as the pole. Of course, when at the mature stage, that is known as the bowl. Difference between afforestation and reforestation is again a similar part here, although afforestation is also a particular topic. Reforestation means you are doing the activity again. Afforestation is the planting of trees, etc., which is done in an area for the first time. Okay. In the forestry optional, when we do afforestation, you have to understand it in few ways. For example, we have to see why a site is being chosen. Okay. For example, just to give you some context here, let's say if I'm talking of afforestation. So why a site is being chosen, right? Second, what are the species that are conducive, and then other factors like what is the soil that is important in this context. Okay. Similarly, other attributes that are needed for the afforestation. So what factors will make this afforestation exercise successful? Fine. I'm putting all these terms in your head right now in the very first lecture, because again in the coming terms we are going to see. And for other parts, for example, what factors will make for a natural regeneration successful? What species should we take? What soil should be there? Okay. Similarly, what factors will make a forest management successful, right? So all these aspects are one that we have to understand in one particular part. Okay. So I hope afforestation is when we are doing the activity for the very first time. Is when we've already done it once, we are again repeating that activity. That is known as reforestation. Fine. All right. So I hope this part is also clear to you. We had already seen the legal definition, Supreme Court part here. Globally, we see different types of forest. We have already seen the forest types in India. Okay, globally, of course, we have tropical rainforest, Amazon. 40% of the global cover is what they have. Temperate forests have around 25% of the global forest cover. Okay, we have boreal forest also. Okay, which are again contributing to around 31% of the global forest cover. And forests, remember, play a very important role. Okay, when I'm saying it, they play a very important role. Now you can be even asked what are the functions which the forests play, or you can be asked what are the ecosystem services the forests have or play. Okay, all these three things, etc., I'm just now going to cover. Okay, related to forest. And this is also where I'll also demonstrate how you can also write or structure your answers better. Okay, if there's a general question, what is the significance of forest, what is the role of a forest, what is the function, or what are the ecosystem services they play, we'll try to do that. And for each point, I'll try to supplement this point by a particular example. Okay, so let us, okay, just a second. So you can just write a heading, the ecosystem services or the benefits. Every year you will get a question in a similar form that the forests do. Okay, although the question may seem very basic, but it will depend on how many points you were able to generate. Okay, for this we have a very simple framework. That framework you can also use for mangroves, you can also use for cold deserts. Okay, so depending, you can just change the ecosystem services will largely be similar. Okay, what are the ecosystem services, or what are the benefits the forest have? Okay, so they provide, there are provisioning services, there are regulating services, there are supporting services, and there are, I can write down even aesthetic, I can say these are cultural services. Okay, now for each of these points we have certain points. That is the level 1 of answer writing. For each of the points I'll give you with certain tree species with good case studies, etc. So you'll have a very good answer. You can use it in this part here, in other parts, wherever you want. Okay, provisioning simply means to provide. What can the forest provide to us? Timber. They can provide us non-timber forest products. Okay, like bamboo, like honey, like resins, oleoresins, shellac, etc., etc. These are the things they can provide to us. Okay, they can also have these, for example, medicinal benefits. Okay, either through the herbs and shrubs, for example. These are all the things that they provide. Okay, so here, and similarly what they will regulate. Okay, they will help in regulating the microclimate, overall supporting the temperature. How they will support? They will help you in nutrient cycling, maintaining the proper balance. Okay, they can also help in improving the air quality. For example, neem, that is Azadi Rakhta indica, is also seen to improve the air quality. We can even have trees, etc., as mufflers to again mitigate against noise or sound pollution. That can be one aspect. Similarly, aesthetic or cultural, so again they can promote hiking, camping, even religious aspects. Remember, sacred groves. Think about khejri trees, for example. Okay, so for all these aspects, just one by one with certain examples, we'll write down a couple of points. Okay, and here you'll also see that we have been able to mention a lot of part here. Okay, so you will start with the very first part, provisioning services. Only the main part, you already know the main points. My only point to tell you is specific examples in each case. Okay, so the very first part here, for example, for timber, by now you already know. We can talk about teak. In teak, we will write down 2 examples. Okay, the 2 examples we'll write down. One you can even write down is related to, let's say, sal, Shorea robusta. Second you can write down is Tectona grandis. Okay, so by now you try to internalize. Okay, just one line. Indian trees like sal, bracket, Shorea robusta, and teak, that is Tectona grandis. Tectona grandis are harvested for timber. They are harvested for timber. Fine. Second point, non-timber forest products. Okay, so example you can write down lac, resins, etc. An example can here be palash. Palash is Butea monosperma, Butea. This is also mentioned in your syllabus. Monosperma, Butea monosperma. Okay, in fact you can also mention bamboo. Different bambusa varieties are also there, but one example each for now, for the very first class, that is good enough. For medicinal part, you can give the example of neem, Azadi Rakhta indica. Okay, neem is Azadi Rakhta indica, so you can just write down this one line here. Okay, other than that, you can even write down the other produce that is also there. Just like, for example, food and fruits. Imli, that we know, tamarind. Okay, so let me just write that in the other page here. So here you can write down the example of Tamarindus indica or mango, Magnifera indica. This is tamarind or imli, right? This is your mango. So food and fruits is a provisioning services. Medicinal, for example, neem can be there. Non-timber forest products like bamboo, etc. You can have Butea monosperma. This is BUTEA, Butea monosperma. Okay. Other than that, of course, Shorea robusta, Tectona grandis for timber. These are all your provisioning services, right? And as you get better with this, you will write even better examples. So no, don't worry about it, right? Then we talk about regulating. Okay. So here, what can they regulate? They can regulate the microclimate. They can regulate the water quality. They can regulate, so again, all the things, air pollution is there, water pollution there, soil pollution is there, overall climate. So 4 things will always be there in regulating. So microclimate, or you link this to climate change. They help in water regulation or fight with aspects of water pollution, with air pollution. 4th is soil pollution. Or conversely speaking, if you have proper forests which have proper roots, so the soil quality can be better, right? Air quality overall can be better. In many parts, the roots help in filtration, the nodules, etc. that are present. The root nodules are also having rhizobium that also helps in nitrogen fixing. Fine. So in regulating, a couple of important lines that you can write down, which can be more specific. Okay. For air purification, you can write down the example of people. Okay, people and neem. For air purification, you can write down the example of, just a second. Okay. For air, we are writing the example of neem, we all already know. Okay. And people, for people, you can just, the scientific name you can write down. Here it is Ficus religiosa. Okay. Neem we already know, Azadi Rakta indica, right? Then for climate regulation they also help, right? Now in climate regulation, one part you can also write is microclimate. In each area they will help you. Microclimate is a subset of overclimate, so they help in better maintenance of conditions. Other than that, you can give examples of how mangrove trees, see, mangroves are very good sequesters of carbon dioxide. Mangroves, etc., estuaries, or these are all related to blue carbon. Okay, so one example of how they can be helpful in climate regulation is sequestering carbon. Give example of mangroves. You can write down Rhizophora, Avicennia. We'll see many of these varieties. For now, you can just write down Avicennia and write down SPP. SPP means species. Okay, we can write down Avicennia SPP. SPP here stands for species. Although there is Avicennia marina and there are many other species that you generally would come across. Fine. So that is one example that we can just write down. All right. Other than that, Heritria based species, there is Sonertia species. Okay, like Sonertia alba. These are all examples of prominent mangrove varieties which help in sequestering carbon dioxide. Okay. So that is one. So that is something you can write down. Another part related to soil is their ability to control erosion. Okay, so soil is prone to erosion by wind or by water. I was constantly talking about khejri trees. Okay, so khejri trees can be given as an example, which also help, okay, in stabilizing the sand dunes. These are Prosopis cineraria. Okay, Prosopis, if you have written, you can just add to this Prosopis, CINER cineraria. These are khejri trees which help in erosion control. Okay, so microclimate we have seen, air part we have seen. That is a lot of part that overall we can talk about, right? Then in terms of supporting services, which was the previous part. So regulating we know the provisioning services. How do they support? So here they help in soil stabilization, they help in nutrient cycling. Okay, so this is one example you can write down for supporting nutrient cycling. Okay, so for example, there are trees. The trees leaves will fall, they will decompose, the litter will be overall useful. Okay, this can overall help in the humus formation in the nearby areas, right? That you can also write down. Okay, plus it supports a lot of biodiversity. So if I talk about wetlands, if I talk about the ecotones like mangroves, a lot of the species are supported here, right? That is why when we cut down the forests and replace it by plantations, those all the species, okay, all the, let's say, different let's say microbes, okay, the bio, let's say, indicators, all of that will not be able to get back, right? So a lot of biodiversity is supported, nutrient cycling is supported. For nutrient cycling, again, we can mention the likes of, like I already told you, rhizobium in the root nodules helps in nitrogen fixation. Okay, later on tomorrow when we discuss biofertilizers, you will have even more specific points to write down. And lastly is the aesthetic part. Again, you can mention khejri trees. Khejri trees, of course, help in soil stability, erosion control, but they are also worshipped, okay, in Rajasthan. Okay, so Prosopis cineraria can also be mentioned here, right? Then again, peepal tree can also be worshipped, right? You have the banyan tree, again for so cultural, religious purposes. Then we can even talk about the other hiking, camping related activities which are also supported here. Okay, that is also one. For example, if I can say the valley of flowers in Uttarakhand. Okay, so while it also is important for aesthetic point of view, it supports a lot of biodiversity, right? So that also can be a good example for us to write. Okay, so if you prepare this, around 16 odd points we have for each, so 4 or 5 points for each segment, with almost 10 odd examples specific. So if you are able to write this and remember this, in both paper 1 and paper 2, you will be able to fetch more marks. You can use the same format in some answer related to paper 1B also, fine. So this is again how we have to structure our answer and we have to write. Okay, so I hope this also gives you some idea about what is to be done. Now, when you revise to the slides, same that I have told you is also mentioned as an infographic, where we talk about all the 4: provisioning, cultural, supportive, and the regulating services. Okay, so the different services are also outlined based on the kind of benefits they provide. Okay, this is also something that one can go through for quick revision. Okay, all the things that we've already done, slightly in more detail. For example, in flood mitigation also, climate regulation we've already seen. For carbon storage, remember the different Avicennia, Sonartia, the species of mangroves, right? Provisioning also we have already done, right? So this is how you can overall understand this whole part here. Fine. Okay. So with this part here, right, there is one last small part that we'll have a look at. Okay, that how can we classify our forests? Okay, the forests can be classified into 8 different segments. Some of this we've already seen once, so we'll just have a quick recap here how the classification of forests can be done. Okay, we can classify them based on the age. Okay, so age we'll see, we can have even or uneven stands. This question has been repeatedly asked in Forestry Optional many a times, so you can directly mention this as a diagram. You can remember the 8 parts here, one by one I'll explain this. And for if it is a more descriptive part, for each of the part, just one line definition followed by the diagram. Okay, that is why we had seen stands. So when we talk about age, you can have an even age stand where all the trees are going to be of similar age. Let's say this is had 30 years, 30 years, 30 years. Here this is an uneven age stand. Okay, these are, and that is why the heights are also going to be differing. Okay, so depending on what is the objective, we can have different age-based classification. That is the first difference that we see. Method of regeneration I've spoken about many times. One can be natural, when we, let's say, go through seeds, which leads to a high forest. We can also have a artificial method of regeneration, like a coppice, like a root sucker, that also we'll see, okay, in more detail. There can also be a growing stock. Okay, now growing stock is again a term that we'll encounter later on in more detail. So for now, we'll just have a look at how we can talk about the growing stock. Okay, now I had mentioned about coppice few times. Okay, this is a normal tree. We cut the tree almost at a ground level. This is the stump. This is known as coppicing. So from this stump, you will see multiple shoots rising in, and slowly and steadily this is going to develop. Okay, so this is one method. This is actually an artificial method of regeneration. The natural method of regeneration is what we have just had a look at through seeds, which leads to a generation of high forest. Okay, so this is one. Okay, Anmol, the tomorrow's demo class is also there. That is also free for all, that you can also have a look at. Okay, so this is one. This is again a method of regeneration. Then another part, so three things we have, okay, so we've seen age, we've seen method of regeneration, there is growing stock, and there is the ownership. Okay, so here when we go to this particular part here, okay, growing stock. Okay, in growing stock, it is simply defined as the total volume of the live trees, which can be either the commercial part or the non-commercial part. And this they have reached. So for example, if I'm talking about trees here, we'll talk about the diameter at breast height at this part, dBH, okay, optimal for the harvest, okay, or at a certain size. So even based on growing stock, this is again a very important part of forest management. This we'll do in paper 2A, right? This is also a very good indicator of forest productivity, right? And this is a very critical factor of forest management. So this is also how you classify the forest. Okay, so growing stock at a particular size or at a particular diameter at breast height, we can do it through the methods of regeneration. We can do it through the age of the stand. Okay, then we can do it in terms of the ownership. Okay, right. Okay, the ownership part here also, whether they are privately owned by the government. When I say the government, remember the Indian Forest Act of 1927. We have the reserved forests, we have the protected forest, we have the revenue or the village forests. So that is one area that we say, and these are some privately owned forests also. So based on the ownership also, we can segregate the forests. Based on the legal status, for this we just had a discussion. Remember the Godavarman judgment of 1996 and the recent Forest Conservation Act of 2023. Okay, so based on the legal status also, the forest can be there. And for the Godavarman judgment, one keyword you have to remember, we will remember that the dictionary definition of forest. Because previously, before this judgment, although it is the Forest Conservation Act of 2023 which takes into account the 1996 Supreme Court verdict in the Godavarman case. So before that, only the forests which were recorded in our record books or that were given legal recognition, only they had to be conserved. But now it extends to whatever meets the dictionary definition of forest. Okay, that is one. Then, depending on what is the objective of the management. So what do we want to do? Do we want to protect? Do we want to maximize the production? So in this, there are three things that you have to remember. If I talk about the objectives, okay, just a second. Okay, so when we talk about the objectives of management, I'll refer to the National Commission on Agriculture on 1976. Okay, so here we can again divide it into ecological, economic and social. Okay, protection is from an ecological standpoint. Production is from an economic standpoint. How much timber, food, fruits, non-timber forest products do we want to maximize? Okay, so Valuable forests, how much do we have? How much mixed forest do we have? Some inaccessible forests, etc. This is the economic aspect. This is again objective of management. And then social forest, right? Again, we can refer to the National Forest Policy of 1988, which again introduces the social aspect, which again talks about aspects like joint forest management. Okay, so this is how also we can club and classify the different forests. Okay, then we can also classify them ecologically. Here also we've already seen that. We have seen the Champion and Saith classification of 1968. There are 16 forest types clubbed in 5 heads. Okay, tropical, we've already seen. So tropical, we have the temperate, so tropical, subtropical montane, temperate montane, subalpine and alpine. These are the 5 major groups, and within that you have the total 16 types of forest. This is known as the ecological classification. Okay, and then we move to the last part here. That is the composition. Okay, so here also we can have the composition can be a single species overall. This can be overall mixed species, right? For if we go for a single tree species, the problem is if one species gets a disease, etc., the whole species, the whole variety will have a problem. Okay, second, these are not very productive. The biodiversity supported here is less, whereas when we go for a mixed stand, it is again having higher biodiversity, lesser chances of totally being attacked by the pests. So this is again a part that you can also say. Fine. Ecological is just what we just saw. Fine. So right from here also, this is also one part that has been asked few times. You have to again remember it. Not very difficult to remember. And some of these parts will again get repeated. So we'll also have a look at it. Fine. So forests can be classified based on age, based on method of regeneration, based on growing stock, based on ownership, based on legal status, objectives of management, composition, and the ecological part of it. Fine. Now what you should do, if you draw a diagram like this, try to recall what all points I've said. Fine. If you're struggling to recall, that would again mean you have to go back and revise these parts. Fine. So this is how you can go ahead, right? The other parts we will have a look at then tomorrow. Before we end, there are few questions that I want you to definitely practice. Okay, and 4 questions I'm giving you, and content for all the 4 we have discussed. First question, justify, and the people who are watching this online also try to have a look at it. Okay, try to attempt it. Justify that the study of sylvics, we have seen the difference between silviculture and sylvics. Justify that the study of sylvics is essential for successful afforestation programs in India. I've only briefly touched upon afforestation, but the point is, if you attempt a question like this, okay, you will have some points. And as we move along and as we discuss afforestation in more detail, you will have more points to write. But again, this should not stop you from writing, even though this is the first class today. But again, this is my appeal that you try to write this, number 1. Second is very straightforward. Define silviculture. We have seen 2 types of definition. Relate the applications of silviculture to the different branches of forestry. Your syllabus is your best guide here. Link it to mensuration, link it to protection, legislation, agroforestry, various parts. This is easily you can answer, right? Give the legal definition of forest in India. This was also asked. Write about the major forest types in India. You have to talk about the Champion and Saith classification here. Fine. The question number 4 is also what we'll do in paper 1B also, but if you want to write down forests, and again you are more than willing to write it. Forests have a moderating impact on soil and water temperature. Okay, so this is what you can try to attempt. Fine. So I hope you've been able to follow this. When we meet tomorrow, we will discuss this particular part here in more detail. Ecological and physiological factors which influence the vegetation. Okay, this also forms the backbone of your entire silviculture. So here we will discuss about climatic, topographic, edaphic and biotic factors. And then in physiological factors, we'll also discuss a lot of other variations, a lot of modifications that have happened throughout. Fine. So we will see this tomorrow. You can go through the previous year questions, right? So just if we have to recap what all we have seen today. So here, if I just make, if I can just start, we started with the overview of the forestry optional and how you can go through certain areas with the best possible, let's say, attack strategy. Okay, total 16 subtopics, 8 topics in paper 1, 8 in paper 2. Right, we then went through about the aspects of silviculture. We had discussed the objectives of silviculture, right? The differences, okay, the difference interconnections that we had seen. Then we had seen a lot of important terminologies, okay? The terminologies right from seed, seedling, sapling, what is herb, shrub, tree, the different terms that are here, okay? Many of these terms we have seen today. Xylem, phloem, what is the work, what is crown, what is dominant, dominated, suppressed, the different crown classification. Other than that, some of the examples of the different, let's say, conifers, okay, other tree species that we have also seen today. Dendrochronology is being one of them, okay, what some other definitions throughout. Indigenous versus exotic, at least one basic case study overall that we have seen, how to talk about it, other definitions also. And then we also discussed the legal part, the other 5 classifications so far, okay. So I hope you got some idea into how to address these parts, okay. So we'll meet tomorrow. Again, the class will be open for all. If you have any doubts, you can reach out. The contact number has already been shared. You also have the Telegram handle if you want to speak to me. And the students who are going to write the Forest Mains for 2024, if you have any issues with respect to your strategy and how to, let's say, cover some important parts, you can also reach out, okay. So with that, we will end the class for today. We again meet tomorrow, okay. All the very best. Thank you.